You are listening to The Pilgrim on the 405 with Will Christ. Join him as he and his guests discover how businesses thrive in California.
Well, welcome to The Pilgrim on the 405, where we help business owners get what they want from their business and help companies in California thrive. And today we are going to hear from a very experienced estate planner. Brooks Travis has his own practice, and he's got over 2,500 clients, so he's got lots of experience with estate planning. And I want Brooks to tell us a little bit about the places that he is involved in learning about the cutting edge of estate planning, wills, and trusts in California. So welcome, Brooks.
Thanks very much, Will. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I'm a member of the American Academy of Estate Planning Attorneys and also a group called Wealth Council. Between the two of those, they're educational groups that make sure that you have to stay abreast of any changes that occur in the estate planning area. And we focus in on that area. Really don't get into any other aspects of the law, but that's a pretty broad area because it encompasses not only doing wills and trusts, trust administrations. For some people who don't do their original trust with us, we help with probates. We also do some veterans administration planning, some Medi-Cal planning, some charitable gift planning, and also special needs trusts for families that have children that need assistance with making sure that they don't get disinherited because they have government assistance like Medi-Cal or SSI or any other kind of public programs which limit your access to the funds that you can have to participate in those programs. So when they would inherit from you, that might throw them off the program if we don't have special planning in place.
All right.
Mainly what I...
Yeah, go ahead. Excuse me. Go ahead.
No, I just said those are the main areas that I hit.
All right. Well, when we what we're doing on the Pilgrim on the 405 is helping business owners to get really focused on a couple of things. One is how to increase their revenue, how to improve the accountability that they have, how to develop their management team so that the owner is not just overwhelmed with all the decisions, but they really have people around him to help. And then the second piece is to keep a business owner from being vulnerable to unexpected crises and traumas. And let's talk about why a business owner should have a trust.
One of the first things, I have a lot of clients that are small business owners, and the trust is something that their spouse maybe convinces them to do, or their family member passed away and realized that if they had a trust, it would have been so much simpler to administer the estate after the death. Or if they are younger and they have children that have been born that they need guardians for, or they're just starting their business and they want to make sure that business is properly planned for if something were to happen to them. And that's really the key ingredient. What will happen if something happens to you and you have a business that's thriving and you have maybe 3 children and one of them you want to leave the business to, the others you don't. Maybe you want your spouse to run the business after you passed away for a period of time. So there's all kinds of issues that come in as to making sure your wishes are fulfilled so the business will thrive, not only while you're alive, but after you pass.
Well, what happens if a business owner doesn't have a trust?
If that business owner dies, some of it depends on the way the business is owned, of course. If the business is owned as their separate property and they die and the property is not included in the trust, they're going to have to probably probate that business if it's worth over $150,000. And the probate, if they don't have a trust, there's certain statutes which determine where ownership of that business will go to. If you have a couple of kids, your surviving spouse would get a third, and the children would each get a third themselves. So you completely lose control of what happens to ownership of the business if you don't do the planning through a trust to make happen what you want to have happen.
Well, can you tell us some stories about unfortunate stories about companies where the owner died without a trust and what happened?
Well, one of the things you have to worry about is who's going to manage the business after you pass away. And if the property has to be probated, there's at least a month, and in California sometimes longer, before any one individual can gain control of that asset legally. So there you have at least a month where the property or the business is unmanaged or unmanageable because there's no plan in place and there's no ownership that the law will recognize that allows that business to move forward. So you're risking the survival of your business by having this space of time. And then the other issue is the person who administers your trust is going to be the one who has control over your business. And is that the person that you want to administer your trust, or is that someone who takes advantage of the situation and gets the court to appoint them? And then, it could end up in an absolute disaster where the business is not going where you want it to go or to who you want it to go to. That's the main thing. You want to make sure that if your spouse is the one that will carry on, that she's the one that's named in the trust to manage the business, or if one child has spent their entire, 10, 15 years in working with you in the business and you want them to inherit it, but we don't specify that in a trust document, then that business would be split among siblings who have no interest in the business and could really destroy the thing for that child of yours who's helped you to build the business. So
Wow.
there's all kinds of issues that if you don't plan ahead of time, you're hoping they'll turn out well, and they normally don't.
Well, it sounds to me like this may not be something that's at top of the mind in most small businesses. Is that right?
Most people that have small businesses come into me not because they have the business and they're thinking about what happens to the business after they die, but because they want to avoid probate or want to avoid estate tax. And the business is kind of an afterthought. And then when we sit down and we discuss the implications of their business, then it takes on a whole different importance in their minds.
So one of the values of a trust is that it avoids probate, right?
Yes.
Well, tell me about, in California, what does probate look like?
Well, right now it depends on what county you're in. All the courts are extremely busy. Some probates run from anywhere from the shortest period would probably be around 9 months for a full probate where you have over $150,000 in assets that you're running through the court system. Some counties will take over a year. In LA County recently, I've had a couple of probates where we filed final papers to get approval, and it's taken 5 months for the court to review the documents to give us final approval. So then there's 4 months you have to wait for creditors to respond to the fact that they've been given notice of probate. And then there's an initial, I'd say a month to 5 weeks where the initial hearing where you're appointed to be the administrator of the estate. So when you add it all up together, if everything is just like clockwork, you're lucky to finish after 9 months, and normally it's closer to a year on a fairly functional probate.
Wow. So if someone has a personal trust, what does that eliminate?
Well, number one, the court does not have to get involved at all because you have instructions in the trust as to what's going to happen. So the successor trustee is the one who's empowered to distribute the business or to manage the business before distribution. So you have the choice to pick someone who you actually want to do the work to distribute the business and any other assets of the trust. So there's no time period when the law is taking some time to recognize who has the power to act, that power is immediately available.
Oh, wow. So that means that in a very short period after demise, that someone could have access to the funds, access to the assets, and maybe, and if the business is included in the trust, access to the business.
That's right. Normally, it takes us about a week to put together the paperwork necessary. Usually, it's called a certification of trustee, where we put the paperwork together, which gives the authority of the successor trustee, the person who follows the decedent, to allow them to start to manage and control the assets. Then we have to approach every asset holder and show the proof of the power to those people. And then we could create accounts adding them as the administrator of the trust and take over the accounts within a very short time. It can be, from a week to about a month before you can get control of everything. But if it's an emergency, you can get almost immediate control of any asset after you have that power.
Well, now I heard the figure $150,000. What is that? Did you say anything over $150,000 in values goes into probate if there's not a trust?
Yeah, if you have a sole owner of that property and it's worth over $150,000, and they have no planning in place, then that would trigger a formal probate with all the lengthy time periods that we discussed. Now, there's ways to avoid probate by doing a trust, and that can be as critical as anything that you deal with, because I recently had a client who had over $4 million in assets, including a small business, and they got ill right after they did the trust, so we were only able to fund their real estate assets into the trust and a few other things. And they had around almost $4 million that was outside the trust when they died. So normally that would go through probate, but we have language in our trust which allows us to prove the intent of the person who does the trust to put assets into it. And because we have the ability to show that to the court, many times the court will say, I understand, due to the circumstances, they just didn't have a chance to fund the trust, so we're going to allow those assets to go into the trust, even though they were never funded. So those types of protections are critical for some of my clients. And if you'll bear with me, one of the instances where people suffer most that have done a trust, they do a refi on their property. The person who does the refi tells them, well, we need to do the refi in your own name. We'll take your property out of your trust. We'll do the refi. And then after we're done, we'll put it back in the trust for you and you can go your merry way. Well, you can guess what happens some of the times is that person who does the refi, they're not so concerned about putting the house back in the trust because they've earned their fees. And so many times they'll leave it outside the trust. And if that's the case, that person could die and never know that their house was not funded into the trust. That's why it's important that you have language in the trust which can save that situation and put that property back to save $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 in probate fees.
Well, with the rising value of property in Southern California, there would be a lot of people with businesses or without businesses that have more than $150,000 in assets, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And all of those people, every one of them, can make it much easier on their heirs if they had a trust. Is that right?
Absolutely. That's right.
Well, now, what role does having a will do with regard to a trust?
A will by itself is a vehicle that's somewhat similar to a trust in that it would distribute the assets to the beneficiaries that are listed in the will. Uh-huh. But one of the big deficiencies of a will as opposed to a trust is that the will does not avoid probate. So the good thing is that it tells you where they want the assets to go. But the bad thing is that they're going to have to do it through a court-approved process, which lasts up to a year. So the will does not avoid probate. That's one of the key elements.
So let me ask this is a pretty dumb question. Is it okay if I ask a dumb question here?
No dumb questions.
I'm looking out from the 7th floor out over Irvine. Now, I'm wondering how many people out there right now have values in their real estate assets of over $150,000, and I wonder what percentage of them have a trust.
I haven't heard the numbers for a while, but it really depends where you are. If you're in Irvine, maybe 40% of the people have a trust. If you're up in LA County, it could be as low as 15%.
But everyone should have one, right?
Well, not everyone, but most people that have significant assets should definitely have it. Or if they have children, that's another key element to having a trust. You want to make sure that your children receive the money in a way which is to their most biggest benefit. If I could go into this just a minute.
Sure.
Children that inherit from parents, we always try to protect those children from what other people can do to them. We don't really want to limit them so much as to how they can spend the money, but we want to protect the assets from what, say, those assets potentially could be taken in divorce away from the child after both parents are gone and the trust is created, or they could have a traffic accident and those assets would be subject to be taken away in a lawsuit. And there are ways to create trust which would minimize some of the negative effects of those types of things that would take assets away from the children. And then there's the other issue, which is really important. And some people have children that are dialed in. They're very successful in their own right, or they have the ability to be successful. They have the discipline to manage their own money. And then there are some children that don't have that skill, or that they may be too young for you to know if they have that skill or not. So a trust is a very important way to give money to children in a way that you might be able to pick Uncle Louie or some trusted individual to help them manage their funds until your children reach a certain age. And they could make sure that, once a child inherits a significant amount of money, there's a lot of temptation and a lot of people that are approaching them with all kinds of opportunities to waste that money. So by having someone who's a little bit more mature, you could even have a professional trustee to help a child until they reach an age where they could manage their own funds, if at all. That is a really critical thing that many people don't really consider, but it's in helping the kids hold on to the funds. That's one of the best things that we can do through a trust.
Wow. Well, those are pretty important things that people should be aware of, right?
Yes, absolutely.
And so taking care of children so that they're protected, that their best interest is being respected and cared for, avoiding probate, especially if like most of the houses that I think I'm looking at in Irvine are certainly are probably have more than $150,000 in equity. So avoiding probate with these and being able to control the disbursement of those assets, right?
That's right. And there are many children that we work with that have special needs. And it used to be historically that, many years ago, that those kids would get disinherited because they were on government assistance, and to receive money after the parents died in their own name would throw them off of that government assistance. But today we do special needs trusts so that that child can stay on government assistance and not get disqualified. And with the proper structure and the trustee working properly to use the money in the trust for the child's benefit, they can still enjoy the inheritance and not get thrown off of the government programs, which is really critical in some instances.
Well, these are very significant aspects of how how a family, number one, takes care of the family, and number two, provides for the disbursement of the assets, right?
Yeah, absolutely. There's also the taxation issue, if you don't mind.
Sure,
talk a little bit about that.
Yeah.
One of the reasons there's three financial reasons, mostly financial reasons that people do trusts. One of them is to avoid probate, which is very expensive. We didn't talk about that. The fees for probate are extremely high. The other reason is to maximize the benefit of capital gains step up in basis. And so when you own a property as community property with your spouse, in a simple trust, if that spouse, one of the spouses dies, the assets get revalued at fair market value for the surviving spouse. So say you have an older couple that they bought their home in the 1980s for maybe $200,000, and today it's worth $1 million, and one of the spouses dies. Well, when the other spouse, the surviving spouse, inherits that property in the trust, they now get it at the basis where it is today. So now for them, their cost basis in the property is $1 million. And if they sold it for anywhere close to what the cost basis is, they're going to save that $800,000 in capital gains that would be subject to capital gains if they didn't have that step up in basis, which is a huge, huge tax advantage.
Wow.
And then in some cases, if the trust is properly prepared, when the second spouse dies, the children who inherit the property from that spouse would also get a step up. So say in the lifetime of the surviving spouse, say they live 10 years, now the property is worth $1.5 million. When they die, that property gets the step up, so that $500,000 that the children inherit, that additional value is not taxed. The capital gains are not taxed. So that can be a tremendous benefit.
Wow.
And that's for all capital gains assets. That includes stocks and bonds, all appreciating assets.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. That's amazing. That's amazing. Well, we want to take a break here. Can you stick around and talk? And let's talk, when we get back, let's talk about what makes a good trust.
Okay.
All right.
Sounds good.
We'll be right back.
Hi, it's time for another tip from Sandler Training. Traditional sales training teaches techniques on how to eliminate stalls and objections. Some are fancy sales moves, while others are programmed responses. Sales is a conversation, and I don't know how you can memorize every possible response for every sales situation. Also, the prospect has usually heard these responses before and has been turned off by some fancy sales move. When you really think about it, the only person qualified to address the stall or objection is the prospect. Ask the right questions, and you will eliminate stalls and objections. And that's another tip from Sandler Training, finding power through reinforcement.
And now back to Will and his guest.
Well, all right. Well, welcome back to the Pilgrim on the 405, where we are talking with Brooks Travis, a highly experienced estate planner who, with his 2,500 clients, has lots of experience in helping people with wills and trusts and helping them to plan for how to disperse assets after death, how to avoid probate and all the expenses with that, how to minimize capital gains as we move forward. Well, Brooks, tell us, people can do lots of different trusts. What makes a good trust, especially here in California? What makes a good trust?
I think one thing is how thorough is the trust? How forward-looking? How does it anticipate things that can happen in your life that would really be devastating if they weren't addressed in your trust? So I think the thoroughness of the trust is the most important thing. We have people that call us up and they say, well, we just want a bare bones trust. We just have this, this, and this, and 3 kids. And then when you talk to them a little longer, you find out that one of those kids has a learning disability. One of those kids is not good with money. One of those kids, you wouldn't want them to manage the money for the other kids as far as being a successor trustee. And then they have various assets that need special treatment. So it's amazing how often when I talk to people who just, basically think, I just want a cookie cutter basic trust, that they really don't need that at all. They need something to address their specific issues and specific needs for their family. And trust, some trusts include some very helpful areas as well. I could mention just a few if we have some time.
You go right ahead.
All right. The first thing, most important thing, is that when you do a trust, it's normally something that you do mainly thinking about how you can help other people, because most of the effect of the trust takes place when you're gone. But there's certain things that you can do for yourself. And one of those things that many trusts that I review does not really focus on is who are going to be your incapacity trustees if you become incapacitated. Most trusts, of course, list who's going to be the successor trustee, who will take care of administering the estate when you pass away. But they don't specifically get into the fact that if I'm incapacitated, I don't want the court to choose someone to take care of me. I want to choose that person myself. And this is one area where we try to avoid having problems where kids will be faced with conflict with one another because of the way you've done your estate planning. So in the case where you say you as a parent, you're incapacitated and your spouse is not available to help, either they're also incapacitated or they've passed away, and you're deciding, I guess I'll just let my oldest child, take care of me in my incapacity, and we'll just let the other ones, just kind of monitor or just watch what's going on. But in that case, you have that older child who's controlling all of your assets, and none of the younger children have any knowledge of really how they're spending the money. So over time, if they see that older child taking vacations, buying a nice car, any of those types of issues, in their mind, they're thinking, they're spending my inheritance. They're spending mom and dad's money rather than, spending it just on mom and dad. And this can create tremendous conflict among the kids. And so this is something that sometimes we allow kids, more than one child, to act as incapacity trustee, giving each of them independent power to act. That means that each child will be able to get a copy of all the financial documents so that they can see what the other one's doing. They can take turns taking care of you, so it takes all the pressure off of one child, and they can share that. And so the suspicion and wondering how the money of mom and dad is being spent goes away, because now they have visibility. So that's one issue where you can avoid creating problems for your children just by the way that you structure your trust.
All right. Well, that makes sense. Now, with regard to a business, what are elements of a good trust that's going to incorporate a business?
Well, you want to be sure that you have the ability to distribute the assets in the way that you want to distribute them. And so businesses can either be, you can set up a unique situation where someone is managing a business for a certain period of time. They have the ability to sell the business, but all of that needs to be spelled out. So the trust has to be able to be specific enough to let the manager that you wish to manage the business manage it, to let the owner who you wish to own the business to own it, and to give parameters as to how that process will go forward, unless you just specifically end any kind of special arrangement that you have. In other words, if the business just passes to the spouse, then the spouse has control over that business. But if you want somebody else to be involved, you really need to include that in trust language, which would make that happen. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, the more specific you are as to what you want to accomplish and how you want to accomplish it, who's supposed to do it, that type of thing, the better. So the creation of trust for not only children but for spouses in the right way can be very helpful.
Wow, so you can use the trust to actually define how the business will either move forward or be sold.
Right, and it could be set up over a period of time. You don't want to go indefinitely with the business and the trust, but sometimes people want a certain time period to pass before certain things happen to the business. And so the trust is a good way to maintain control of it by someone who you want to control it until those things happen. And the business either gets sold or management is maybe changed to a child who's more mature. You know, anything really could be written into it.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's interesting. So when somebody's working with you on building a trust, you're really helping them to think through what's going to happen, right?
Absolutely. That's my main benefit, is that I help them think through things that otherwise they really wouldn't be thinking about.
I wonder what keeps people from lining up outside your door.
They do, Will.
Oh, they do.
I've got about 10 in line right now.
All right.
No, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding.
Okay. Well, what I mean, when we looking out over Irvine here and thinking about if you say in Irvine 40% of people have trust, that's 60% don't have trust. I'm wondering why they don't. I'm wondering what's getting in the way of them. Is it that they don't know about it? They don't want to? What do you think is getting in the way?
I think part of the problem is that trusts have become a little bit commoditized, and people don't realize the thought process that can be very helpful in going through a trust. So they, may try to do it online or something like that, and they think that has the same value as going to a professional to do a trust. So that, I think that's one thing. Some trusts can be very reasonably priced for the types of information that we provide, but we're not the cheapest out there. So if people are shopping price only, then they may be a little bit concerned about paying for a professional person to do the planning for them. So I think sticker shock and not realizing the depth of what's necessary to do planning in the right way are two of the main reasons that people don't do it.
Well, talk to me a little bit about the range of costs. I mean, what does a trust cost done well?
A well-done trust would really, with a professional person, I have to say that, who specializes in the area. Those are all very important. Mm-hmm. You want a professional who specializes in the area of estate planning to do this, because it is way too complex for somebody who's involved in 3 or 4 other areas of the law mm-hmm. to do this kind of work. So that can cost anywhere from, I'd say, probably around $1,600 to $3,500 to $4,000, depending on the situation.
Okay, and that's not, if someone has a business and they have assets. That's not something's going to get in the way if they recognize the value of what a trust gives them.
Right, and when I quote that price, I'm not quoting just the trust. I'm quoting about 9 or 10 documents that surround the trust and are needed to do a complete estate plan. So, for example, a trust manages your trust assets, but you might have annuities, life insurance, IRAs, 401ks that are not trust assets. They're managed outside the trust under the power of attorney. So you have to have a durable or property power of attorney. You need a healthcare power of attorney for healthcare issues if you're in a coma or unconscious. And you need a property agreement, which determines how the property in the trust is going to be held and how, when you pass away, the assets will be treated. And it has community property issues that are in the property agreement. We also have a general funding of tangible personal property document into the trust because as you remember, if you have a trust, you need to put those assets that you have that should be in the trust in the name of the trust. And that document puts the tangible personal property items around the house, like your clothing, appliances, furniture, all those types of things into the trust. So that doesn't run up to your $150,000 outside the trust, which would throw you into probate.
Uh-huh. Well, now are things like IRAs and retirement funds, are they in the trust?
They're not put in the trust normally because they're pre-tax dollars. So say you have $200,000 in an IRA and you do a trust. If you were to actually put those assets into the name of the trust, that means those assets are no longer owned by you, but they're owned by the trust, which is a transfer of ownership, which has a tax consequence. You have to pay tax on all that pre-tax money. So those types of assets do not go through probate. They don't, so we don't have to worry about that. But one thing we've been doing a lot lately, and this is available to clients who have a significant amount of assets in IRAs, you wonder, well, why can't they get the benefit of a trust for their children? So normally the spouse is the primary beneficiary, but the children is the secondary if the spouse were to die before that client who owns the money. So normally their children are named, but if we do a protective trust for the children, we can actually name that protective trust to take the minimum required distributions that have to go out to the child beneficiaries of that IRA. So it used to be where you had separate assets. The IRA couldn't be put in the trust, had nothing to do with the trust. Other trust assets, of course, were in the trust. So you had kind of like a separation. But now we can take advantage of the trust for the children that we create after the second spouse dies and provide creditor protection for those IRA assets in the trust for the child, which they would not have if those IRA assets were in the own child's name, in their own name itself. So in their own name, there's no protection that the Supreme Court decided about 5 or 6 years ago, that the protection that a normal man or woman would have of up to $1 million in California for their IRA assets, for their qualified assets, that protection goes away when the children inherit those funds. And so by making the children's trust the beneficiaries, they regain that creditor protection aspect for their inheritance.
And that's just a part of what you would do in building a trust.
Absolutely, but that planning has only been available for the last several years. But it's a very excellent way to provide the maximum benefit of the child's trust for them.
And that is a reason for working with someone who is focused on every jot and tittle of estate planning law.
That's right. We go over all the client's assets, and we talk about the strategies for how those assets will be inherited. We also look at their income stream, and we look at it now, plus we look at the income stream when they retire, so we can give them some advice possibly on how to maximize the income from their assets upon retirement. Because some people really don't give a lot of thought to that before, some of them don't have financial advisors. And so we kind of act a little bit in that capacity to make sure that when they retire, the assets are going to do what they think they're going to do for them.
So what we really have is we have two questions that a family and or a business owner should be asking. Number one, why don't I have a trust? and should I have a trust? And then the second one is, who should do that for me? Does that make sense?
Right. I think so, yeah.
So let's go over, we've got just a little bit of time left. Let's go over again the reasons that people in California, families and or businesses, should have a trust.
The way I look at it is there's financial reasons and there's personal, emotional support, family support reasons. The financial reasons are, number one, to avoid probate, which is very, say for a million, if you had $1 million estate, the cost of probate would be about $23,000 for the attorney $23,000 for an administrator, and then about $2,500 for the actual court costs. So you're talking about $50,000 if you had a house worth $1 million that went through probate.
So that would be significantly more than the $1,600 to $3,500 that someone would have to pay for a trust.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then there's you want to maximize the benefit of the proper use of capital gains, and that trust can help you to do that. Mm-hmm. And then the third thing is estate tax, and it's kind of interesting what's happening with the Trump tax plan. The House of Representatives in their plan has eliminated it completely. Right now it's at next year it'll be at $5.6 million per individual. The Senate version has $10 million, I think, built into their plan. So it's going to be interesting to see if the two come together, if they ever get a chance to come together, what they'll end up with as far as estate taxes. So the state taxes may be a little bit less important while the Republicans are in power, but if the Democrats get back in power, it could be a different scenario.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then the second question, once someone recognizes the overwhelming value of having a trust, then the second question is, who should do it for me? There's a lot of people out there who will say, well, I can get on the internet and I can get it done myself. What's the value of using someone who is focused and has lots of experience with estate planning and trusts?
Most estate planning attorneys, I believe this is true, offer free initial consultations, and you'd be remiss if you didn't take advantage of that. So when we work with a client, they call in and we send them some fairly simple documentation so that we get a good idea of what their assets are and their family structure. And then we meet with them, and many times I'll meet with them up to an hour and a half, where we'll discuss all their options based on what information they provided and what I learned during the interview. And then at the end of that meeting, I'll have a plan together for them, and they can decide whether they want to move forward or not. So that's a nice benefit, I think. For most people, we don't actually charge for that meeting. So I think it's something that you wouldn't want to miss if you had an opportunity.
Mm-hmm. All right. So is there anything that we've missed that we should be talking to people who are looking at their trust or their lack of a trust?
I think most of the people that are older that haven't done a trust, when they experience what goes on when one of their loved one dies, it makes it very clear to them how important it is. So it's kind of like a painful experience for them. And then when younger kids, I have a lot of clients that are younger, they have their first child, and they're thinking at that point, what happens if to our child if we're both killed in an accident and we don't have any planning in place? Who's going to take care of them? And then if you have a home in California and it's not in a trust, it's going to be potentially subject to probate. So it's mostly to avoidance of pain, and also in planning your business. You don't want to make sure that it goes exactly like you want it to go, because it can be extremely painful to all involved if it doesn't.
All right, so let's suppose someone said, that has convinced me of something that I have not been thinking about, and I'd like to talk to Brooks Travis. How would they get in touch with you?
They would just call our office at 949-454-8706, and Teresa or Joan could set them up with an appointment and send the paperwork out to them so that they could prepare. Usually people come in within a couple of days of calling, and then it takes us about 2 weeks after we've had the initial consultation to prepare the documents for them for signing. So it's not a very long process. And we like to make sure that we get the documents done quickly so that we don't have a situation where somebody has decided to do planning and then something happens to them before they can sign their documents.
And so if they call you, you'll help them to get to the front of that long line that's outside your office right now, right?
That was a joke, Will. Yes, we will.
So give us the number one more time for Brooks Travis.
949-454-8706.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Brooks. This has been just a wealth of information, and it should bring any family or any business owner in Southern California. It should help them to think through, if they don't have a trust, why don't they, and what are the values of having it, and then what happens if they don't. And so I thank you very much for being part of this, part of the Pilgrim on the 405 as we continue to help businesses thrive in California and to help entrepreneurs get what they want from their business. So thanks a lot, Brooks.
Will, thank you so much for the opportunity.
And so this is the Pilgrim on the 405. Again, looking for all the places that will help business owners get what they want from their business and help businesses in California thrive.
You've been listening to The Pilgrim on the 405 with Will Christ. To hear more of the programs in this podcast, go to www.willchrist.com.